Hello and welcome to the Waynesburg Effect, WCTV's only political talk show. I'm your host, Dylan Cleland. Joining me today on our panel from left to right is Drew Rhea, Dakota Kiefer, and Ian Popovich. We're going to dive into a lot, including the Democratic primaries, which are rapidly approaching, Britain's exit from the European Union, which is upcoming, and finally we'll conclude with the latest mass media mishap, as Tucker Carlson of Fox News has been in a little bit of hot water lately. All that and more coming up next on the Waynesburg Effect.
You don't know what's going to happen with the hurricane. You cannot predict its path.
And he didn't clearly understand what his job was there to do.
And that's sad because he's just a statistic now.
Total lunacy.
It's an alarming statistic.
That ended up winning the National League to face the Red Sox in the World Series.
But clearly he didn't understand the context of the speech.
If you haven't heard me talk about this yet, I'm sorry.
Come on, people now, smile on your brother, everybody get together, try to love one another right now.
With 2020 approaching, the Democratic primaries are going to be in full swing quite soon, and there's many candidates to dive into. But first, let's talk about Bernie Sanders, who has been in the news lately. He is going to run officially, he has announced. But how is his approach to socialism going to affect this run?
Well, Bernie Sanders, I do believe he is a genuinely good guy who just wants the best for everyone, and that's not the problem. As someone who is a Democrat, I do not identify as a democratic socialist because as flawed as capitalism may seem to some, it's much better than how socialism ends up working out. I mean, it does seem great in theory, talking about free health care for all, equal living for all, so there's no one that's a step above everyone else. But on a large scheme, on a grand scheme of things in a big country like the United States, it just doesn't really work out. I mean, the best example, and this isn't even a country that pales in comparison to the size of the United States, Venezuela. That's a country where it's socialist and there's an authoritarian dictator, and almost everyone goes to bed hungry at night, not knowing if they're going to get food. Food is used as a weapon in Venezuela because the citizens don't know if they're going to eat or they're going to eat the next day. It's really scary, and I don't necessarily like where the Democratic Party is going, leaning so far towards socialism because they're scared of capitalism because of the 2008 economic crisis. They got scared of capitalism. They don't think it's the best way, and it is flawed. I do agree. Capitalism sometimes has its flaws, but when it comes down to it, it works so much better than socialism, especially on a grand scheme of things. I mean, you have the unemployment rate drifting around 4% and below for the last 12 months. I mean, that is all due to the fact of capitalism. Capitalism makes people work. It gives them jobs. Not only the white men, but Hispanics, African Americans, and women, their unemployment rates are at all-time lows. And that's due to capitalism. And socialism, I just don't see that benefiting the country in the long run.
No, to be honest, Dakota, socialism is probably the biggest mistake in human history over the past 100 years. 100 million people dying at the hands of socialist regimes in the past 100 years. And as you said, Venezuela, people eating dogs in the street, is that really what we want to bring to the United States, such a prosperous nation right now under capitalism? The leader in Venezuela, I believe it's Maduro, he's actually gaining weight per year, where the average Venezuelan citizen is losing 36 pounds just of last year. So, wow, this guy's, feeding himself and enjoying the fruits of socialism for himself. The rest of the country is suffering and starving, which to me is just not the right way to run things. And then a lot of people point to Nordic countries as shining stars of socialism. To me, that's a little antiquated. You have these countries like Denmark and Sweden, like you said, that are a lot smaller than the United States. And even there, people are starting to question socialism. They're seeing places like Venezuela and the effect that socialism has on nations. And they're sort of backing away. They've had a lot of individual liberty legislation passed recently in Denmark and Sweden, trying to back away from socialism a little bit. So there's question marks in the nations that are seeing the short-term gains of socialism because they're looking at nations like Venezuela where they're seeing the long-term consequences. So I think that under this guise of democratic socialism, let's not try to pretend like these are different things. Democratic socialism is socialism. And honestly, socialism was created by Karl Marx when he created communism. It was supposed to be the bridge between capitalism and communism. So, I mean, if we really want to go down that route, I just think that would be a mistake.
Drew, I definitely agree with you because it wasn't correct. It was correct that it was a Marxist theory. And one of the things, though, and I understand both of your fears, but here's where I'm going to go ahead and let you know that 57% of Americans have already voted that socialism is probably the best choice, and it dropped, and only 45% of them. All right, have voted that they should keep capitalism. And the biggest thing is that since like 8 years ago, it's dropped to like 56%. And it used to be like the major dominant within our country. And this was just a little bit of information that I got from the Press Enterprise. A college political professor, Harold Clark, he estimated that the biggest increase was due to millennials. And the thing that I've understood why this has been growing so much in America is because you got to think, because it's a Marxist theory, that was a Cold War theory. That was something that was scaring so many people, and only the older generation is going to be fearing that socialism belief. And us having parents who definitely grew up from that time frame, we're all thinking to ourselves, oh yeah, this is a stupid idea. Because why would I want to eat my dog because I have to survive?
Yes.
And it's just proving because millennials, and he mentions, and it's because they aren't shaped by Cold War politics, the propaganda. Nothing was affecting them, so their thinking is like, oh, we're going to look at all these small little facts about socialism being beneficial, and the fact that it's helping me, the little man, and making the government less controlling. But it's not how that works.
No, it's not.
Well, the thing you mentioned about Americans wanting socialism in polls more than capitalism, that's why I think it can benefit someone like Bernie Sanders, though, who runs on these principles. He's very popular. Even in the last election, I mean, he came very close to beating Hillary Clinton, and Hillary Clinton in the Democratic Party had a wave riding with her. She was a woman running for president. She ran before her loss. This was her second time. She wanted to be the first woman president, and her time was running out. She was getting up there in age. But Bernie Sanders came very close. I mean, he's also getting up there in age, but he's an old white man who doesn't really fit the criteria of what the Democratic Party wants now. But his views absolutely do with the socialism, because that's where the Democratic Party is more so leaning now. They're leaning really far left instead of down the middle, centristic values almost, like Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. So Bernie Sanders has a really good shot of making it through the primaries for the Democrats.
Well, speaking of that and the ideology behind what the Democrats are kind of looking for heading into 2020, let's briefly, if you could each give a candidate, someone that has already announced. There's, as of yesterday, I saw 14 Democrats have announced they're running. Go down the line. We'll start with Drew, who you might see emerge as a front runner.
Yeah, so Beto O'Rourke announced very recently that he was going to be running for president. And I think that's someone who could take a very early lead. You're talking about a deep grassroots guy that gave Ted Cruz, who basically is the state of Texas, a run for his money in that election. So I think Beto could be someone that could push the limits for the Democrats, someone that's not far left like Bernie Sanders, someone that's more centrist, not so much as centrist as Joe Biden, but he's a lot closer to Biden than he is Bernie Sanders. So I think that someone like Beto O'Rourke really could make a deep run at the Democratic nomination.
I think Beto O'Rourke is another one who can make a deep run at the Democratic candidacy. But I really want to talk about who do I think can beat Donald Trump. And I think if we're going to a general election, it's absolutely Joe Biden. I think he is absolutely the best qualified to that middle ground of working class Americans. I mean, the other day he was giving an address to the union firefighters. I mean, that's something you would never see Hillary Clinton do. You would, and that's why she lost the last election. You know who you would see doing that? Donald Trump. And that's the only person that I think in a general election could beat Donald Trump. But I just struggle to believe that he'll make it out of the primaries because he's an old white man with centristic values who doesn't lean far enough to the left. And unfortunately, I don't think the Democrats are going to realize that he's their only shot at beating Donald Trump.
Yeah, I kind of want to agree with the Joe Biden mention because of the fact that he does support the more lower working class, whereas everyone's going to associate with Trump representing just the higher middle class. You know, people like us, we want to have somebody who can support us, somebody who looks out for our best interests, not the guy who we have to work for and we have to pay for his like Bugatti or whatever. You know, I definitely would give a strong mention to Joe Biden, but if he doesn't go, if he does not announce that he will be doing it, I honestly think that most of his support will go to Bernie Sanders.
Okay.
But yeah, Dylan?
Great thoughts as always. When we come back, we'll dive into Brexit here on The Woo Effect.
Hello and welcome to The Journey, WCTV's only faith-based program.
Over the course of this semester, we are going to walk with students through their daily lives and take a look at how faith impacts them.
Please take a half hour, sit down, and relax with us as we go on a journey with students, staff, and residents of Waynesburg.
Welcome into another edition of Jacket Sports Weekly.
Homecoming game against Carnegie Mellon. And finally, Hugh, we're starting to see this offense put together some drives and really...
We kind of saw the offense just compile together and have a great showing. Chad Walker, 61 rushing yards and a touchdown. And the receivers, it just wasn't one main guy. It was Cole Booth, Jawan.
25-23 and 25-18. But perhaps the biggest takeaway in that match, all of whom had season highs. They only had one block in the entirety of the match.
We run our best race at regionals, we can make it to nationals.
Continuously see him. We saw him a couple weeks ago. Game-clinching interception for the football team.
Back on the Waynesburg Effect, and now we're going to shift gears and talk about Brexit, the planned leave for Great Britain from the European Union coming up at the end of the month. It's been very controversial out there, and let's take a look at how it's going to hit home. How is this going to affect the United States?
Well, Dylan, I want to just go ahead and just let you all know that the Brexit thing is basically, as it is stated, it's just a shorthanded way of saying that Britain is in fact leaving the EU. And they stated that they were going to leave for a while now, but they had a referendum basically on June 23rd on a Thursday back in 2016. They had a resounding successful vote on basically they wanted to leave with a 51.9%. And only 48.1% said that they wanted to, in fact, just stay. But it was a resounding saying that they wanted to leave. And they had a 71.8%, 30 million of all of the UK was going to vote. Everyone of adult age was voting for this. So that just shows how much that they all wanted to be out of the EU. Now, there's like a bunch of statistics involving also other countries that were thinking about leaving, such as Scotland and Northern Ireland as well. And they both declared that they were going to remain staying within the EU. And basically the EU was basically created during World War II, and it was supposed to be a way for the countries that were combined together would have more trade, more abilities to communicate with one another, and it allowed everyone to basically not have a reason to go to war again. That's the whole reason for this whole thing, is so they don't go to war again. But ever since in the newer age, it's become nothing more than a single market. People from different states or different countries, rather, they will go ahead and just go right into other countries. But Dakota?
I'm going to mention a little bit about how it will affect the U.S. And the day after the Brexit vote, the Dow fell 610.32 points, and currency markets were also in complete turmoil. The euro fell 2% to $1.11. The pound fell, and that they increased the dollar. But at the same time, that strength isn't good for the U.S. because for stock markets, because it even increases the price in gold. The price of gold went up by 6%. So it does have major ramifications on the U.S. It may not seem like it because they're across the ocean, but it really does. And not only that, it also makes U.S. exports in the U.K. more expensive, and therefore that would affect farming and manufacturing over here in the U.S. And that's something to really look out for, because they are going to leave the European Union, and that can have a lot of impact on the U.S. They are our closest ally, and not only that, a really good trading partner with us, export-wise. So money-wise, farming, agriculture, it really will impact the United States, and it's something we should brace for just a little bit in this country because it's coming up very soon this month.
Absolutely, and you talked about the markets. Anytime that there's uncertainty across the globe, our markets are affected by it, and it's usually a negative. People don't want their money where there's uncertainty, and there's certainly a lot of speculation in Britain right now, especially with Prime Minister Theresa May. She survived multiple votes to remove her from office by a very slim margin. Like it's almost insane to think about it. How many times she's survived a vote to be removed from office. So moving forward with Brexit, I think in the United States, you want certainty across the globe. And as a libertarian, I don't like when the United States interferes with other nations. But let's be honest, London, Great Britain, is a huge tourist attraction for people in the United States. So with them leaving the European Union, there's less of a chance of American lives being at stake because, as Ian said, with the European Union, you can travel between countries, and a lot of times, there multiple attacks have been launched at Europe, moving through multiple countries, people that are just undocumented because they're crossing multiple borders at one time. So I think this is a good thing for United States travelers, and if they can get a smooth leave from the European Union, then I think it's also a good thing for U.S. markets.
It'll be interesting to see how this kind of shakes out and the effect that it does end up having on the United States when they leave at the end of this month. When we return, we'll talk about Tucker Carlson and some mass media controversy next on the Waynesburg Effect.
You're watching The Buzz, your place for all things Waynesburg. I'm Lindsay Stinger, your campus news host.
My name is Brian Bauer.
I'm Andrew Sloboda, your entertainment host.
My name is Corey Tretinik, and I'm here with this week's entertainment news.
Buzzing on campus. And remember, it's all of your beeswax.
It's all of your beeswax. Remember, it's all of your beeswax.
Welcome to Watch This. I'm Brennan Rossi.
And I'm Chris Hulse.
On this show, we look at all of the national movies and TV shows that are making shockwaves throughout the society.
Join us as we review and preview Hollywood's best and worst.
On Watch This.
Tucker Carlson of Fox News has made the news recently after some tapes were found of him making some racist and sexist remarks over 10 years ago on a radio show. Guys, first I want to get your initial thoughts on that and then dive a little bit deeper into the media war that's just ongoing.
Yeah, so Dylan, I don't think anyone here agrees with anything that Tucker Carlson said in those tapes. But we do have to keep in context that this was 13 years ago. Tucker now does not believe, I don't think so, anything that he said in those tapes. And especially in politics, opinions on things change rather quickly. 13 years ago, people often forget that neither President Obama nor Hillary Clinton believed in gay marriage. They were both opposed to it in 2008. And we saw how quickly, a lot of the social norm changed with that and sort of forced a lot of politicians' hands into, really fully supporting it. So things change really quickly in politics. And I don't believe that Tucker Carlson believes what he said in those tapes anymore. Now, as far as today, how it affects today's world. I think that anyone who was offended by Tucker Carlson's remarks that addresses him does deserve an apology. I think he should apologize for what he has said, whether it be the victims of some of the people that he was trying to excuse their behaviors in the tapes, whether it be someone that's just generally offended by those remarks. Personally, if they ask him to apologize because they felt personally attacked, I think he should apologize. But this idea that, people from CNN can call him out and say and demand that he apologize for something that he said 13 years ago that he doesn't agree with now, I think is a little absurd. I think it's Tucker Carlson, I really don't think owes someone, Don Lemon, on CNN an apology for what he said when he wasn't affected by what he said at all.
I'll get to the apology part in a couple of seconds, but I don't necessarily believe that he doesn't believe everything that he said, because there was one thing that really stood out to me that he said. He made jokes about, I forget the name of the celebrity, but some celebrity being with a 17-year-old. This dude was really famous, and he was with a 17-year-old, and he was just making jokes about it. He's probably with her. He's probably in bed with her. And then the shock jock mentioned that he would get in legal trouble for that because she was underage. And Carlson joked that nobody will get in trouble with that when they're in a position of power because they have a position of power, and no one gets in trouble for things like that. And that right there clicked with me. That's very similar to something that Donald Trump said. I can't say what he said on camera right here, but that's very similar. When you're in a position of power, they let you do it. They don't care. And that's something that, Tucker Carlson has defended Donald Trump through thick and thin. He never really bashed him for the things that he said regarding those topics, and it makes me question, did he really change how he felt about that now? Does he still feel the same way about someone if they're underage, or if they're just a woman in general and a celebrity is pushing themselves on them? Does he really believe that they shouldn't get in trouble or they won't get in trouble? And do they really have more power than the United States government and anyone just getting them in trouble for underage women, just women in general? It's something that really stood out to me. So maybe some of the racist things and things of that nature, maybe he doesn't believe anymore. But that stood out to me. I don't know if he's completely changed his views. And when we're going to the apology, he didn't apologize. His first episode back, after everything came out, he said he's not going to apologize. He said what he said. But for him and for who he's on, I know they're losing advertisers. I think that's the best way, because you mentioned, though, CNN wants him to apologize.
Exactly.
And when he apologizes, they're not going to forgive him. What are they? They're going to try and make him lose his job. Instead, he stood his ground.
Dakota, I don't honestly think he's gonna want to apologize. He's constantly said Fox is gonna cover him. He's constantly gonna say that, hey, this was 13 years ago. Why do I have to care? Honestly, I'm on the side of whether or not, should he apologize? I'm honestly one of those kind of guys that's like, I say something in the privacy of my own stuff. I'll say something, but do I mean it? No, I don't. But, when you're saying it on air, that's a whole other thing. Mm-hmm. That's a whole other story. And I have a very small button, but it can be easily pressed when you go towards sexism or anything misogynistic towards women. And I heard some of the things he said, he called women things. He called them dumb. He referred to so many awful things. I don't know about an apology to CNN. I expect an apology to just women in general.
That's a fair point, but let's take a look at it from this perspective. Do you think by not apologizing and allowing these media figures to continue to say these things, do you think that's going to help or hurt the state of how the media is perceived by not only the country, but also the people in the government?
I definitely want to mention that it is going to help him, because he's not going to want to apologize, because he's getting free media from this. Because people are going to watch him and listen to him because they want to try and see if they can catch him on something else. And it's just to increase his ratings.
Honestly, Ian, I don't think he needs help with ratings. This year alone, Tucker Carlson is pulling 2.9 million total viewage per episode. That's 41% more than Chris Hayes, who's on at the same time on MSNBC, and 122% more than Anderson Cooper, who is on at CNN in the most hour. Tucker Carlson leads all of cable TV at the 8 p.m. hour in 2019.
What's crazy is I think the way he handled it with not apologizing, even though I do believe he should apologize in general, and especially to the victims. But I think the way that he handled it, not apologizing, will almost benefit him, especially for the station he's on. He's on Fox News. Yeah, they're losing advertisers, but they know generally what their station stands for, and they like Tucker Carlson. He brings in ratings, and I think he'll still bring in the same ratings anyways. Things like this didn't impact Donald Trump from winning the presidency. Why would it impact Tucker Carlson from drawing in viewers from those same voters watching him, especially with another presidential election coming up? I just don't think it'll change that much.
And to be honest, the point that Tucker made, he really said that, when people apologize, they sort of disappear. The same thing happened to Kurt Schilling, and I think if Tucker Carlson backs down to some of these other major networks that are calling on him to apologize, you might see the same thing. He might be silenced.
Not apologizing might help ratings, but it might not be ethical within media lines all the time. When we come back, we'll wrap the show up with our commentary segment here on the Waynesburg Effect. Back on the Waynesburg Effect, it's time for some commentaries. Ian, we'll start with you.
Well, guys, I want to just mention a CNN business report saying that Toyota is working on a moon buggy. So Toyota came out with a claim that they are going to be creating the first moon rover to go ahead and transport astronauts across the moon's surface. It'll be the size of 2 minibuses together, and they're going to try and have this done by 2030. I found this very interesting because I'm a huge technologies guy. I enjoy all the things that Toyota does. I like Toyota as a company, and it is run by a fuel cell electric vehicle. So it will be completely electric, and it's actually supposed to be the newer age stuff. So it's supposed to go ahead and be much better than the new electric cars today.
My rant, again, is going to be sports, as it usually always is, and it's very close to home. Le'Veon Bell signed a 4-year, $52.5 million deal with the New York Jets. This after the Antonio Brown trade, and now Antonio Brown is the highest paid receiver in the league after demanding to be traded in a very crybaby way, and that's a different story. But Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown won. I don't think Le'Veon Bell won. Le'Veon Bell did not get near what he wanted. He's getting $13 million a year instead of getting the $15 to $16 million a year that he wanted, or maybe even more. The Steelers, in fact, offered him a 5-year, $70 million deal that he turned down, but he accepts a 4-year, $52.5 million deal with the Jets. I really don't get it. I don't know what goes through these players' minds. I really don't know what happened to Antonio Brown. And Le'Veon Bell, I think he needs to fire his agent because sitting out a full year absolutely did not benefit him.
So everyone says to study history because it may repeat itself, and I think we all agree that that's very important. Mm-hmm. And now, less than 100 years after the greatest attack on the Jewish community of all time, the Holocaust, we have another elected leader saying some anti-Semitic things. Ilhan Omar, the representative from Minnesota, over the course of a couple, just very recently, came out with a lot of anti-Semitic comments, and honestly, a lot of Democrats backed her up and tried to back her up, and then after a lot of pressure from the Jewish community, have really sort of questioned and taken back their support of her. So read history books, kids, because you never know when someone else in power might say something that's just egregiously wrong.
Mine deals with outdoors. In fact, the weather. It's changing. Some spring weather finally here, and coming back from spring break, everyone has a lot going on. We're all very stressed out. This week, I encountered some technology problems that I just have not ever had to deal with before, but here we are. So my thing is, step outside, take a deep breath, enjoy the weather while you can, and do something. Play some catch, even if it's 5 or 10 minutes. Take a deep breath, enjoy it, and just step away from the worries of the world sometimes. I want to thank Dakota, Ian, and Drew for all of their expert commentary during this episode. I'm Dylan Cleland. Thanks for joining us on the Waynesburg Effect.
This has been a production of Waynesburg Community Television.